Welcome back to Yang Daily. I'll be your host, Alex Cheney, bringing you all the Yang news you need to live your life right. The craziness continues, but at least we're caught up now. Should be back on the schedule going forward, though I might have to take a day off again soon for other reasons. Between the UBI March, my usual Saturday obligations, and trying to catch up on this ridiculous week of news, it's been a very busy day. I hope you all participated in the march, either in person or online and through the WAD app. I'll touch on that tomorrow, but Income Movement's Twitter basically has all the action if you want to see everything that went on. For today, we have a whole lot of other stuff to get through. Gonna be a long one. Shout out to our Tier 3 patrons, Peter Park and Shay Meehan, as well as all our other patrons. This one is for you. Starting off on a high note with 2 new Humanity Forward endorsements. Bryn Kennedy is a tech CEO, a former competitive gymnast, and the founder of a nonprofit that helps displaced refugees. She is running in California against a 5-term Republican incumbent who has repeatedly denied the threat of climate change. I was wondering how gymnastics background would be relevant to politics until I remembered how politicians end up twisting their morality into a pretzel. Kidding aside, great to see more nonprofit leaders and a fellow gymnast running for office. And we certainly can't afford to keep any politician who will ignore the threat of climate change as it ravages our economy and our people. You see how well that worked out with COVID. Next up, Kasim Rasheed is a human rights lawyer and someone who brings people together. When a Virginia resident tweeted an Islamophobic message to Kasim in February, he responded by donating to help pay off the man's medical debt. That act of kindness started a different conversation. They even met up, and the man planted a Kasim for Congress sign in his yard. Kasim is a passionate advocate of UBI running in a competitive Virginia district. Check them both out and consider supporting them. Now on to the very, very bad, sad news part. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who, as we discussed, has been battling pancreatic cancer for months, lost that fight yesterday. Architect of the legal fight for women's rights in the 1970s, when Ruth wanted to be the Supreme Court clerk in 1960, she was rejected because of her gender. More than 30 years later, she made it to the High Court bench herself. Ginsburg subsequently served 27 years on the nation's highest court, becoming its most prominent member. She spent her final weeks working from the hospital and home while battling cancer, so as not to give Republicans the chance to rush through a third justice in Trump's one term, which would massively unbalance the court. I can't rightly put into words how messed up it is that she had to spend her final days worrying about that, or how much we need Yang's policy for regularly cycling justices on an 18-year limit. Just days before her death, as her strength waned, Ginsburg dictated this statement to her granddaughter, Clara Spera, quote, "My most fervent wish is that I will not be replaced until a new president is installed." End quote. It's a request which will not be honored by Trump or the Republican Senate, who have already promised to fill the seat as quickly as possible. Trump tweeted that Republicans have an obligation to move without delay to replace her. This despite the very same people fighting tooth and nail to deny Obama an appointment in his last year of office, supposedly on moral grounds. Mitch McConnell in 2016 said, quote, "The American people should have a voice in the selection of their next Supreme Court justice. The American people are about to weigh in on who is going to be the president, and that's the person, whoever that may be, who ought to be making this appointment. Therefore, this vacancy should not be filled until we have a new president." End quote. Bear in mind, he was saying that when the appointment was 8 months out from the election. Lindsey Graham was even more specific and adamant, saying in 2018, quote, "If an opening comes in the last year of President Trump's term and the primary process is begun, we'll wait for the next election." End quote. Or in 2016, quote, "I want you to use my words against me. If there's a Republican president in 2016 and a vacancy occurs in the last year of the first term, you can say, Lindsey Graham said let's let the next president, whoever it might be, make that nomination." End quote. Surely, having laid out the scenario in stark detail and having made his position unequivocally clear, Lindsey will be opposing the appointment, right? Wrong, of course. He's now saying the situation is different, as is McConnell, as are all the rest, pretending they didn't argue for the people to vote first. This is me using your words against you, Lindsay, as requested. I hope your opponent, Jamie Harrison, buries you with them. All the Republican senators who said similar are flopping like the hypocritical fish they are, just as they did after repeatedly calling Trump the devil in the 2016 primary just before turning to 100% support him. The GOP used to run on character. Sometimes they still try to. I guess they neglected to mention the nature of that character is spineless, hypocritical, self-serving, and traitorous. Still character, though. If you want to be even more depressed and incensed, you can check out Trump's list of potential replacements for RBG, including such sterling names as Senator Ted Cruz, Tom Cotton, or Josh Hawley. Clearly qualified people to serve on the Supreme Court and men of character, at least by the above definition. If you want to make your opposition to this hypocrisy clear, or if you agree with the moral argument of Republicans circa 2016, you can text RBG to 50409 to use ResistBot to sign a petition advocating for the Senate to delay the appointment until January. Signatures are already in the hundreds of thousands. Proceeding with the bad news, we're really racking up the authoritarian red flags coming into the election. Trump, speaking at the first White House Conference on American History, talked about the twisted web of lies taught in our schools and said that the nation must restore, quote, patriotic education, end quote, in schools as a way to calm unrest in cities and counter lies about racism in the United States, including a grant to support the development of a, quote, pro-American curriculum, end quote, and sign an executive order starting a, quote, national commission to support patriotic education, end quote, called the 1776 Commission, in opposition to the New York Times essays advocating for accurate representation of slavery and racism in our history. He goes on to say, quote, many young Americans have been fed lies about America being a wicked nation plagued by racism. Joe Biden and his party spent their entire convention spreading this hateful and destructive message while refusing to say one word about the violence, end quote. That, of course, is a lie, just one sentence after he accuses others of lying. As usual, Trump is guilty of almost everything he accuses others of, which is why he makes the accusation. He expects others to be like himself. Democrats, especially Biden, have repeatedly denounced all violence and have been focused more on the message of unity, problem solving, and civil rights than hate, not to deny their propensity for sharing their feelings about Trump himself. Much in contrast to the RNC's own convention, where they specifically featured people whose only claim to fame was for advocating violence. Biden responded, quote, I urge the president to join me in saying that while peaceful protest is a right, a necessity, violence is wrong, period. No matter who does it, no matter what political affiliation they have, period. If Donald Trump can't say that, then he is unfit to be president, and his preference for more violence, not less, is clear, end quote. Trump's backlash against a fair accounting of racism in the U.S. comes just after the Social Progress Index found that we are the fastest declining nation in the world in quality of life, and that we rank 100th in the world on equal treatment of minorities, which countless statistics support. What the study found we did rank highly in was confidence in our exceptionalism, i.e., regardless of the facts, we still think that we are the best. We have an unfounded, faith-based confidence that ignores our failings, ensuring they will not be corrected as we fall into decline. Coincidentally, Teach American Exceptionalism is one of 2 education goals listed on Trump's second term Fighting for You agenda revealed ahead of the GOP convention. This is what Trump wants to double down on. It's how he's lived his whole life, touting himself as the greatest businessman as all his businesses fall into bankruptcy, claiming the greatest response to the pandemic as we rank among the highest rate of deaths per capita. At every turn, rejection of fact and replacement with rosy lies is Trump's move, and he wants our children to be made in that image. From Trump, quote, our youth will be taught to love America with all their heart and all of their souls, end quote. I'm going to repeat that. They will be taught to love America with all their heart and soul. Let me be clear. The goal of education in a free society is to teach how to think for yourself and to arm with facts and knowledge for more informed thought. What Trump is advocating for here is to avoid facts, which could damn us to repeat our worst mistakes and those of others. What he is advocating when he says that we will all love our country unconditionally is the opposite of free thought. He is advocating to indoctrinate and brainwash our population into a faith-based nationalism that places loyalty above all else. I cannot emphasize enough how anti-American this is. America's Constitution, Bill of Rights, and other laws are centered around freedom of thought and freedom of expression. Anytime someone talks of making everyone think the same should be cause for alarm, not least because this is a universal hallmark of authoritarian regimes everywhere, that being loyalty above all. Free societies do not make patriots through brainwashing, they make patriots through serving the people. Remember that. Trump also gained fresh accusation of sexual assault to add to his extremely robust collection, this time from Amy Dorris, a former model. She accused Trump of forcing his tongue down her throat, groping her all over her body, and holding her in a grip she was unable to escape at the U.S. Open tennis tournament more than 2 decades ago. Via his lawyers, Trump denied in the strongest possible terms ever having harassed, abused, or behaved improperly, as he always does before settling out of court. I won't go into the details. Sad as it is to say, I doubt that one more accusation will convince anyone if the dozens of others have not already. Yesterday, let me check, yes, September of 2020, Trump announced that $13 billion will be sent to Puerto Rico in relief for their hurricane in, let me check, yes, 2017. I'm sure it's just a coincidence that Trump waited until just before the election to provide relief for a hurricane 3 years late. I'm sure no one suffered or died in that time who could have been saved by that money arriving when it was needed and when any administration that gave a damn would have sent it. Sterling leadership, as always. The UBI guy, as he's known on Twitter, or Conrad, as he's known to his parents and friends, has written a breathtakingly eloquent essay on UBI, but also addressing the nature of wealth, welfare, meritocracy, economic metrics, incentives, poverty, perception, echo chambers, and more. It's so good that I'm going to read the parts that most impacted me as excellent and unique framing. First, his definition of freedom. Quote, "A person is free if they have the agency to both say no to a bad situation or yes to a good one without risking major personal harm, including financial catastrophe. If your boss or your spouse is abusive, you need to be able to walk away from that job or that partner and know that you and your kids won't go hungry or homeless. On the flip side, if you encounter an opportunity that does not pay right away, but helps you to pursue your best self, you should be able to pursue it with the same knowledge of your basic safety and needs. Anything less means that you are beholden to those with money for your security. You exist at their permission, and what we get as a society is a prettied up form of indentured servitude." End quote. I love that he added the ability to pursue opportunity on top of the familiar ability to refuse exploitation. That will be my definition of freedom going forward. Next, on human nature, quote, "A while back I read about a study of infant development in a David Graeber book, Bullshit Jobs of 2018, that helped synthesize everything about the human nature puzzle that I'd been trying to make sense of. At some point early on, when a baby is learning that it is a discrete entity apart from other objects, she'll maybe move an arm or a leg and bump into something on the table, causing that object to move in some way. And then she'll do it again, and the object will move again. And this tiny human will realize that she has the ability to be a cause. This moment is always accompanied by elation at the realization that one can have a tangible impact on the larger world. I believe that from that day forward, for every human being, the primary motivation in life is to achieve this feeling of causality as much as possible, to shape the world around us, to gain control of what we can, and thereby to thrive, grow, and matter. We usually call this purpose." End quote. He goes on to describe how we've structured the economy to pervert pursuit of purpose into pursuit of money. Conrad on a human approach to change, quote, "Once we realize that we are all the same creature, we can finally begin to see each other. We can begin to understand people in poverty and their drives, just like we can begin to understand people with wealth and their innate goodness and humanity. We just have to start from the premise that everyone wants to matter. Take any person you encounter from any walk of life and start from that single assumption with an open mind, and you will have a basis to understand why they are and who they are. The solution to all of the struggle we face cannot be to blame the poor for existing, and it cannot be to task the rich with solving everything. Neither is reasonable or fair. We must come together in a spirit of trust and understanding to share these responsibilities. We must take a systemic approach. We must redesign the mechanics of the game." End quote. This is the part that I feel is missing from most political movements, including Bernie's otherwise valid cause. Demonizing those who are following the incentives laid out before them is not the way to progress. It's so easy for us to fail to understand another human's perspective, even if we would act the same had we been in the same situation. It's as difficult for the rich to understand the poor as vice versa, as difficult for the politically polarized to understand one another, and difficult to understand that all of these people might be trying to do what they believe to be right and good. But that is the reality. It's something that Andrew Yang understands, and it's one of the reasons that his campaign was so successful. You don't unite a country in common cause by making enemies of each other. You do it by finding what you can work on together, and assuming that everyone fundamentally wants progress. Back to Conrad, quote, "Most people don't know this, but the game Monopoly was originally called the landlord's game, and it had two modes of play. Monopoly was the game mode designed to demonstrate for us exactly what we should not be doing as a society, namely creating a system in which one person ends up owning everything and everyone else goes broke. Apparently, that's the version that caught on. The other version was called Prosperity. The winner was defined as the player who had the most money when the player in last place reached a certain level of success. What a concept, this idea that there can still be winners in a game in which all prosper, that we don't need to have paupers in order to have princes, that nobody needs to fight over scraps." End quote. I never knew this, and it kind of blew my mind. What a simple but profound difference in the rules and name of that game. What a philosophical statement. And what a pity that it went the way it did. I wonder how much difference it would have made for kids to grow up playing Prosperity instead of Monopoly. I look forward to when we make that the game of life for ourselves and our children. Back to Conrad, quote, "It is said that money is the root of all evil, but money is just a tool. Scarcity and insecurity, or the deprivation of access to that tool, are the real roots of evil. It's the lack of money and the possibility of having zero that gives rise to the corruptive forces twisting our natures and behaviors. UBI removes the worst of scarcity and insecurity, replacing them with agency. Our ultimate agency and our joy in the ability to be a cause are what elevate the humans above the critters. Without it, we're cornered animals running on adrenaline and necessity, reacting to our surroundings rather than creating them. Without it, the game is flawed and unsustainable. UBI is the rewrite. What if we ensured every human being a chance to show us their full potential by stripping away their most basic fears? When you take time to really sit with it, you might realize that UBI isn't just unconditional money. It buys so much more. It's unconditional love, trust, respect, dignity, power, time, hope, opportunity, security, resilience, and agency, and it can help bring us all back together as people. With the permanent and unassailable knowledge of unconditional income security at a basic level, every citizen could enjoy both the feeling of support from their society as well as the enhanced responsibility and accountability that comes with trust granted. With much of the daily existential fear unshouldered from the masses, each human being now is able to lift their eyes, look around, look ahead, and participate actively in the shaping of our society. Our economy and our democracy would be unleashed to flourish like never before. The burden no longer on the wealthy to single-handedly solve the world's problems and drive the marketplace. but instead deputize to every individual to make the necessary changes at the most local of levels, their own lives. End quote. Notice the framing: unleashing humanity, empowering individuals, democratization of power, responsibility, and opportunity, a better way of life for everyone, not just a particular group. This is the way to present UBI to the world. This is something everyone can embrace. Conrad, quote, I would combine UBI and universal health care and say definitively that if you have your health and enough money to access your basic needs guaranteed, then you are free, full stop. These two pillars, UBI and universal health care, together represent the most important human rights fight of the foreseeable future. UBI is power to the people, distilled to its simplest and most efficient form. End quote. I couldn't agree more, Conrad. Thank you for putting it so well. Since the essay is long enough to scare most people away, I've clipped images of what I read to you here and attached them in a thread along with Conrad's essay. I ask that you share the thread as much as possible and bookmark it to continue sharing it because everyone needs to hear these words. Building on the letter from yesterday, a coalition of nearly 4,000 individuals and organizations are calling for a guaranteed basic income in Canada to address systemic gender inequities. Again, more of that down here. In answering a question on Twitter, I put together a thread which broadly explains the myriad funding options for a UBI in what I think is pretty decent fashion. Being as this is usually the central focal point for objections to UBI, I suggest checking it out at the link below and bookmarking and sharing it might be useful. And finally, one more piece of good UBI news. By unanimous vote of the City Council, the People's Prosperity Guaranteed Income Pilot of St. Paul will launch next month to support up to 150 low-income families impacted by the crisis. There was a challenge to CARES Act money being used to fund the pilot, and public funding has been a wall yet to be climbed in most cities trialing guaranteed incomes, so this is a big win for UBI. And that'll do it for today's Yang Daily. Check out, follow, and consider supporting Bryn and Kasim. Text RBG to 50409 to add your name to the petition. Bookmark and share the thread on Trump's patriotic curriculum, the UBI funding thread, and Conrad's UBI essay thread. Help recruit other organizations to the cause and get everyone to sign the UBI petition. Flood Congress and Trump with calls, tweets, and letters using the Resist Bot or Income Movement easy contacts below. If you need help, consult Humanity Forward, the Income Movement Aid Database, the Mission Asset Fund, United Way, or the H3 podcast thread. And don't forget to Yang Daily.